On this episode, agronomy researcher Steve Salisbury from Oregon and member of the Mint Industry Research Council shares how mint isn't just for your mojito or toothpaste today. This versatile herb is used for essential oils, teas, medicines, culinary dishes, and even insect repellents. Plus, Jody Lawrence joins us from Nashville to discuss how oil prices have responded to the recent bombing of strategic Iranian targets by the Israelis and how the upcoming U.S. election could impact agriculture tariffs. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink. And welcome back to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith. And joining us from the state of Oregon is Steve Salisbury. And Steve is a researcher, and he's working with the Mint Industry Research Council. Steve, welcome to FieldLink.
Hey, thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Steve, tell us a little bit about home. Where is home in Oregon, and how did you get involved in the mint industry?
I'm based in the Willamette Valley in Western Oregon. I was born and raised here, actually, in the Willamette Valley. This is grass seed country. We're the grass seed capital of the world here, but peppermint production in the Willamette Valley has also been a big deal. Been here for a long, long time as well. So that's where I'm based out of. I'm familiar with the Pacific Northwest in general, but this is kind of home for me. My job at the MIRC, I guess the title they give me is Research and Regulatory Coordinator, I guess. So my job is to basically oversee all of the research and the activities of the MIRC, and we do everything to support the North American mint industry. So whether it's supporting regulatory actions, supporting research actions, soliciting research proposals, to making sure that all of our members are being heard and what their concerns are, and I do that as well. I go to Capitol Hill and talk to legislators, senators, and congressmen there about ag needs in general, and some of the federal programs that we rely on in the program or in the council. I get to work with the end users, I get to work with the buyers, and I get to work with the growers, and it's a great position. I enjoy it because the versatility in that position, but yet at the end of the day, it's still, for me, it's still all about the farm, and we make sure we take care of the farm. So that's me in essence, I guess, who I am and what I do.
Hey, Steve, we're excited to have you join us today and talk about this awesome herb that I think a lot of us often overlook. We walk down the counters and we see different types of products that have mint in it, or maybe a diffuser. We'll walk into a room and have these awesome scents out there. And, mint's used for lots of different things, including one of my favorites, a good mint julep every now and then is pretty good.
Oh, I was expecting you to say toothpaste. I mean, everybody thinks toothpaste. So,
well, I just got back from a bourbon tour, so I was in Kentucky and had an opportunity to try some of your product.
That Moscow Mule, you found that Moscow Mule? It's got a mint leaf in it.
There it does, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you got to have a little cocktail every now and then to go with mint, but mint's seriously used for lots of different products and that we use on a day-to-day basis. But it takes a lot of production, a lot of growers, a lot of research to go with mint. And Steve, tell us a little bit about the mint industry from your seat.
Yeah, so I mean, overall, it is a long-standing traditional crop. It's got a long history, as a lot of other crops. It's not a huge commodity, right? It's not one of the big fives. It's definitely a minor crop, specialty crop, but it's very, very important because we don't think about it. You mentioned all the flavor and fragrance world that you find all of the mint, whether it be peppermint or spearmint, either way. All those flavors are coming from a natural source, and they're coming from peppermint fields and spearmint fields grown across the U.S. So, yeah, it's long-standing history in the U.S. and it started in Europe and made its way to the United States, and it's migrated its way across the country for a reason.
Sure.
We can probably talk about that, but yeah, it's a very long-standing traditional crop.
Well, Steve, I did a little bit of research, and it says about 70% of the world's production for mint is done right here in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do growers in the U.S. grow this crop?
It takes very clean ground, and it's kind of a race against time when it comes to like verticillium wilt. That's the disease of the century, and it's part of the reason why that mint crop has evolved and migrated across the United States, looking for virgin ground that is disease free. But it's a perennial crop. We plant the roots. It's also clonal, so we propagate the roots and replant. Basically, they plant the roots in the ground, and The mint comes up in the spring, and it's interesting because it's a field crop. I don't know, similar to, a lot of people ask what's it similar to. We talk sometimes. I'll compare it to alfalfa, how it just kind of comes up in a big meadow crop, and then we cut it with put it in a windrow, let it dry down for a few days, and then the cool part happens, which everybody gets fascinated with, which is the distillation process. So that mint is chopped up with like a standard chopper, corn chopper, for instance. Most people would be familiar with. That chopped material gets blown into what looks like it's what's called a mint tub. It's a rolling cart. Basically, it's a box, but it's a pretty specialized box. And that tub, when it gets to the mint still, the steam line gets plumbed into the bottom of that still. The hot steam basically rises up through the chopped mint material in the tub. The steam basically pulls that. It cooks the oil out of the plant material. It carries that oil through all the tubes back to the condenser. This is classic organic chemistry class here.
Sure.
And then it's all condensed. The heat, the steam is condensed back to liquid. The oil falls out, the water falls out, and then the separation occurs. And because the oil is lighter than water, and that's how they separate it. And the oil goes into a drum, and off she goes. It's a fascinating process.
Well, Steve, I think that's a great correlation, mint to, like, a lot of us are very familiar with alfalfa. So with alfalfa, we can get 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 cuttings, depending upon where you're located. But with mint, is it a one and done maybe per year, or you get a couple cuttings off of that crop?
It goes both ways. We can a lot of guys will single cut. The majority of the crop is single cut, but there are contracts out there for double cut mint. So you'll hear guys will take 2 cuttings and then they're done. And the double cut mint, sometimes it's based on, not sometimes, I should say most of the time, it's based on a quality parameter. If the buyer is looking for a specific oil and they're going to want double cut because they get different notes out of that oil on a double cut than you do at a single cut, they'll want to buy double cut mint. So the grower will go in, usually about, out here in the far west, usually end of June, 1st of July, they'll make the first cutting. And once that first cutting is made and you're taken off, you can start counting, and it's usually about 63, 64 days, you'll get the second cutting. So you get one there in early July, and then you'll get another one right around, in August, possibly into early September, depending on how the weather fares and summer fares. But yeah, 1 or 2 cuttings, majority of it a single cut.
Well, Steve, you mentioned, it's a perennial crop. So how long does a field of mint last until you have to tear it up and maybe start over or rotate to a different crop?
That's a common question. Most of the time, what dictates that, just like any other ag commodity, it's the contract, right? So typically, we always tell people, typically mint will stay in the ground 3 to 5 years on average, and then it comes out. And sometimes the contract, the business of mint will dictate that. Sometimes it'll be disease. Once the verticillium sets into, it's a soil-borne pathogen. Once it sets in, it starts really dwindling your crop away, and then it's economically not feasible to grow it anymore because the disease is there and it won't allow for as much material. You won't get near as much yield, and the crop just kind of dissipates and goes away. So it's about 3 to 5 years guys take it out. That does not mean that they can't go back in there. They can go back in there if their verticillium pressure is light or not at all. They certainly go back in. If it's light, they can go back in, but the grower knows ahead of time that he's going to have to deal with the disease, and it may be a short-lived rotation. But normally speaking, we say 3 to 5 years is about how long it's in the ground.
Mint's grown in several states. You're obviously in Oregon and Washington and Idaho have production, but also Indiana, Michigan are big producers of mint as well.
Yeah. So, I represent the MIRC, the Mint Industry Research Council, and I can tell you that overall total mint production, the state of Washington is still number 1. They have been for a long, long time. It's because they grow both peppermint and spearmints in Washington, because the Columbia Basin there, Central Washington, very, very good spot for mint, and it has been for a long, long time. It's a very traditional spot. Idaho is a big producer now. A lot of acres have moved over to the Treasure Valley there in southwest Idaho. So kind of outside of that Boise area, the Caldwell-Nampa area of the Treasure Valley. There's a lot of peppermint there, a little bit of spearmint there as well. In Oregon, Central Oregon had been big traditional mint producer for a long time, but that ground has been almost entirely wilted out. So you don't see a whole lot of production over there anymore. We have production in Oregon, both here in the Willamette Valley where I'm based. So there's a few thousand acres here in the valley. And then over in Eastern Oregon, you got to go all the way over to La Grande in the Grand Ronde Valley. And there's some acres over there as well. The Columbia Basin, the part that kind of comes down just south of the Columbia River. So you got all the Washington production up north in the river, and then there's a little bit on the Oregon side there as well in the Hermiston area. That's a very good production area. And then there's a little dabble in Southern Oregon. So believe it or not, so there's a little bit down there too. Then we get out to the Midwest, and then Indiana has been the big driver in the Midwest for a long time. There's a lot of acres that are still there in Indiana. Michigan has got some production. Wisconsin has also got production. And those are kind of the three big ones that with the MIRC. There are some other little satellite productions that are North and South Dakota, a little bit of production, a little bit in Minnesota. I think there's some in Western Ohio. And then if we start migrating a little further, Montana's got a little bit. And might get a little bit in Northern Utah, a little bit in Northern Nevada. So it's a little bit pockets here and there. The big drivers, though, as we mentioned, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And then we have also in our group, we have a contingent of growers up in Canada. They're in the southern Alberta, in the plains of Alberta. There's some production there. They do, a little bit of peppermint and some Scotch spearmint up there as well. So.
Well, Steve, earlier you referenced production's really based upon contracts. Tell us a little bit how the marketing of mint is in this industry today.
Sure. Happy to do that. I'll do the best I can. So the MIRC, if I can back up, Bill, so the MIRC, the history of the MIRC, what we actually represent, I get to work with and represent all three legs of the value chain, all the entire value chain. So I get to work with the growers, I get to work with the buyers, and then I also get to work with the end user manufacturers that take the oil and make consumer product goods. The MRC is an awesome organization because it's the full integration of the mint industry, which is very cool. So when it comes to like the markets and those sorts of things, we're in an interesting spot because our bylaws, we can't control the market. We can't have those kind of collusion or whatever conversations, but I can talk about the market and what's going on there. So the buyers, the fragrance, basically, I'll say oral care and confection are the big market drivers for us. So if you think about your peppermint gum, your spearmint gums, your mint candies, all those sorts of things, that's a huge part of the market. Oral care, huge part. Toothpaste, mouthwash, all that kind of stuff. And you can look at like peppermint ice cream. You can look at some of the other food and ingredients and things that are out there. Peppermint's always been a very traditional flavor and fragrance. We have another member of our council who's in the aromatherapy industry, and that's a huge deal. And mint oil is a big part of that as well for them. So it's an interesting market where things can go. We're always looking for opportunities of new uses for mint oil. So the growers, they get a contract from the buyer, and the buyer has their list of customers that they've got to supply so many pounds of oil to fit that need, whatever it is. So then the buyers basically take that order. They come back to the growers. They try to contract. The balancing act comes in any ag commodity, right? Where you got a market for something, and then you've got what's a perennial crop. It's not an annual crop. So you have to keep in mind, when you extend a contract out for so many years, now you got to forecast your sales and the demand and the supply demand chain on the other side for so many years. And that can become a little bit of a challenge when, economies go up and down, market usage goes up and down. And that can have a real bearing on how lucrative the contract can be, how available the contract can be, and also how long that crop will be there. Is it worth the grower's effort to put it all in? It's and I know every commodity is this way. I'm not talking about anything that's new to ag for sure, but it certainly plays a role in the mint industry. We're not a big crop nationwide. We don't have a ton of acres. There's a fair amount of acres, but trying to get that balancing act. And, for instance, when COVID hit, the mint industry really struggled. And we are still trying to get out of the struggle following COVID, because when the pandemic happened and everything shut down, people weren't going to work. They weren't going out socializing. So as you can imagine, we weren't brushing our teeth. We weren't chewing our gum to keep our breath fresh. We weren't all that kind of, and the market plummeted. And now we're in a state now in a market where we're starting to see more and more of that use come back. In fact, we had one of our members report here recently that they're starting to reach pre-COVID levels of sales in the market for mint-related products, which is really good for the mint grower. So we're trying to straighten this little wrinkle out in the supply and demand equation. And so long story short, as everybody on your program knows, that means soft market.
Right.
And the growers are, there's a lot of frustration out there right now, but the promises looks good. It looks good. The future looks bright if we can just kind of get things kind of back into normal, I guess.
Well, Steve, what's really interesting, as I hear you talk about the Mint Industry Research Council, is your group really has a wide range of memberships, from the producer to, I would assume, some of the input folks, but also the buyers and then the end users.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about end users. What are some of the big names that I guess the average listener might be aware of that's using Mint?
Yeah, I don't think I'm stepping out of line here to share some member names. The ones most probably commonly known by all the listeners is Mars Wrigley. As you can imagine, Wrigley gum and Wrigley candies, and Mars now owns Wrigley, so it's Mars Wrigley. They're a big one. And then the other big one is Colgate Palmolive, and we appreciate people buying Colgate Red Box toothpaste, because there's a lot of North American mint oil that's used in those products, and that's what it's a big deal. So those are some big guys. So there are others, and don't want to ignore the others, but it's very cool in our organization when you have the folks like Wrigley's and Mars Wrigley's and Colgate at the table, and along with others. We have others as well. Like, Young Living is an aromatherapy member. They're huge. If anybody's familiar with that whole scene and the essential oils and stuff, it's mint oil is a big deal for them, and they're one of our board members as well. So very cool to hear, because they have a different perspective, right? And what's very cool about the end user, and I get this great job of getting to work with both the growers and the end users and the buyers as well. The buyers play a critical role here, but it's awesome for me to understand what's going on in the field with the growers, and then being able to go talk to end users, and because they want to know, they really want to know what's going on. If they care about the growers, they want to know what's going on. And then vice versa, then they've got the growers are always going, what are those guys need to buy more oil, And so it's an interesting dialogue between the organizations, and that's where the buyers play a key role as well. And we certainly appreciate the buyers and what they do as well.
Oh, wow. What a neat, I guess, a neat group, as you step back and say, boy, you're putting all of the decision makers that can impact the industry together really in one room to create the greater good.
Absolutely. So and that's what the MIRC is all about. We want our members, the entire value chain, sit in a room, and what are the major issues impacting mint production in the US and Canada? And then can we as an organization have any impact to help solve the issues? So for instance, our priorities, we have kind of 4 main priority areas in the MRC. One of them is integrated pest management. So all the IPM needs of the crop production side of things. When it comes to weeds is a big deal, right? I mean, we cannot have kochias and pigweeds and lamb quarters and those sorts of things in our mint production, because they actually taint the flavor and fragrance of that oil. It's amazing. I mean, I learned a new word, Bill, when I came to work for the mint industry. It's called organoleptics. How about that?
Interesting.
So yeah, don't ask me how to spell it. But at any rate, if you have too much redroot pigweed or water hemp or Palmer amaranth or those sorts of things in the crop, it taints that oil. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't smell right, therefore it doesn't taste right, and therefore you have a product that guys like the Colgates and the Wrigleys, they might not want that, because they've got to handle it more to get it to where they want it to be. And so that's weed management's a big deal. And of course, like any other crop, entomology is a big deal. I mentioned verticillium before, plant pathology. That's just a big driver. And we talk about it. It's the disease of the century. I mean, we've had this problem for over 100 years, and we're still looking for an answer. It is very difficult to address that. So the council comes together and says, all right, here's our issues. How can we address this? So we got integrated pest management. We have IPM. We have varietal improvement, which is our genetics program, where the MRC has made a very concerted effort in the last decade to do everything non-transgenic. All of our breeding and genetics efforts are non-GMO, because we have segments of our market that they just won't accept it. So we can't. Why would we as a council want to invest in it if the market's not going to accept it? So it's a little bit slower road to get there, but we are working on improving cultivars of mint as an organization, as an industry, to try to get over these hurdles of things like verticillium. Can we create a plant? Can we select for a plant that's a little more tolerant or a little more even possibly resistant to the disease, but yet still kick out oil that is marketable? And that's what's the whole genetic scene is very, very interesting in that regard. Peppermint is an evolution of a plant that it has 3 ancestral grandparents. And if you think about putting all of those chromosomes kind of jumbled together, it's Mother Nature and an act of God that we have Black Mitchum, which is the standard peppermint that we have. It's very, very interesting. So getting scientists to recreate that's difficult, and it's supposed to be quite a challenge. But we're making some pretty good headway there. So we got that bucket. We also look at sustainability and agronomy. We call it agronomy sustainability. So things like fertilizer, irrigation management, water conservation is a big driver for a lot of our end users. And how do we, and then the growers as well. It costs the grower. The grower knows where his costs are, and irrigating is one of those costs. And if there's a way we can do it more efficiently, we reduce the energy inputs, we reduce the cost of production, we get a lot of good things. So we've water has been a big deal. Distillation is one of the focuses. How do we this process of steam distillation has been around for a long time, right?
Sure.
So how do we make this better? And the growers are very, very good, as always. I mean, every farmer I've ever met in my career is so progressive, and they're good creative thinkers. And you get these guys in a room, and you get some scientists from universities and whatever in the room, and start talking about, we should try this, and this, and it's incredible what can come out of that as far as positive results. And then that's the sustainability agronomy piece. We could talk about all these forever. And then the fourth one is new markets or novel uses of mint oil. And so we're always looking for, we've got the oral care and the confection markets. We have the aromatherapy piece. Are there other ways we can utilize mint oils in different ways? So we actually fund research. Council comes together. We recognize, that's a priority. Let's fund some work to try to pull the lid off of some new opportunities. I mean, and the idea behind that is if the MIRC, if the industry invests in that priority and they come up with some science to show some concepts, well, that data, then we just give that data to our members, right? They're paying for it.
Sure.
All those members have their own product development teams. They take that data in their own house, and then they do what they want with that. And that's actually, and I've had conversations with our members recently and asked them, is this working out the way it should? And every one of them was like, this is awesome, because we can get this data from this research, hand it to our team of people, and then they can take it and run with it, which is very, very cool. So in essence, I mean, the MIRC is working for the entire industry. So as the growers are getting taken care of, as well as the end user, the buyers are a critical piece here in keeping things together and moving in the right direction.
Wow. Interesting industry, interesting research that's being done in this area. Let's talk a little bit about one area of mint that often gets overlooked is the medicinal side. I mean, there's a lot of health benefits to mint.
A lot of health benefits. We're very interested in that, in the kind of the pharmaceutical side and those sorts of things. One of the researchers that we've been funding for the last few years, he has been doing a lot of like human health response scenarios with mint. So it's science. We're getting really good data. So like, for instance, the current study he's working on is the second year of a sleep study, and it's utilizing, in this case, one of the treatment is spearmint. Spearmint has a calming, relaxing response, is what you see from human nature, basically. So he is treating. He's got access to a sleep study lab where he's got his people that are coming in and sleeping in a lab, and they're infusing spearmint, and then they're recording like how much actual REM sleep are they getting, how are we impacting their sleep quality, not just the quantity but the quality, and then also looking and seeing what's their human response like afterwards. When they wake up, do they feel better? Do they have a better day? How are their cognitive skills? What's their moods and those sorts of things? And we're seeing some very, very positive results out of that. We've done the same thing with peppermint. You'll like this one. We had a study on peppermint to see how it impacted your driving skills.
Wow.
And it's everything very, very positive. If you're driving a car and you feel fatigued, man, that's where that stick of peppermint gum comes in handy. That's the peppermint infuser in your dashboard vents, those sorts of things. your level of alertness was up, your concentration was up, everything was improved with peppermint there. So there's different utilizations, and we're learning. We've known this, but now we're trying to kind of, like I said, kind of take the top off of some areas like sleep. What about your driving skills? We even did academic achievements, like where we took students and we infused peppermint and take an exam, and did their exam scores go up or down? Those sorts of things. So we're looking for these different avenues to try to find some niche homes for more mint use in basically in markets. So it's very, very interesting.
Well, and certainly the research dollars going into those things, I'm sure, are going to certainly pay off, especially if you start to hit a home run with some of those things you just described, such as sleep apnea and those sorts of things, especially in the driving. When you look at insurance companies, the benefit that could do.
Yeah,
boy, we'll have mint diffusers in all of our vehicles coming off the Ford lines in Detroit and so forth.
That's right. Just make sure it's North American mint oil that's in your diffuser. That's that.
There we go.
Yeah.
And that's a good point, because as I mentioned on the opening, 70% of the production in the U.S. Or in the world is from here in the U.S. But there are some emerging countries, such as Morocco and China and even India with some production. But certainly the U.S. has a pretty good stronghold on that, as well as Canada.
Yeah, we pride ourselves in our producers. I always tell everybody, our producers are the best mint producers in the world. They do a great job. They do it the right way. You got things like pesticide traceability and usability in the field. We're growing our mint responsibly. We're doing it the most efficiently we could do it, the least amount of water, we're trying to do it the right way, very sustainable way, right? And keep our growers in business. That's key. And I'm not going to address the foreign sources of oil, but they're there, and that's who we're competing against. And how do we get a leg up? How do we do it better? How do we do it right? How do we produce more pounds per oil per acre and stay economically feasible and competitive in that market? Our oil is some of the best quality oil in the world, and I don't think anybody will argue with that. If you talk to all the buyers, and we're talking worldwide buyers, this is where we come for the best quality mint oil we can get.
Well, I would think, Steve, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think that when we're talking about companies like Mars, Wrigley, and organizations like Colgate, Palmolive, that are really, I'll call them personal, intimate types of products, it's pretty important for them to know where their inputs are coming from. And
absolutely.
Tracking is going to be critical for them, I would assume.
Absolutely. Just like any other food crop in the U.S., right? The United States has the safest food source and commodity production in the world. It comes with a heavy price to the growers. We're heavily, heavily regulated, right? But we do have the safest source of food in the world. And mint, it may not be a direct food, like we're not drinking mint oil, thank God. I would not advise that at all. But it's a flavor that enhances our lives, and it's being produced here in the United States and being done the right way. It's very interesting. There was a marketing campaign done by Colgate a few years ago where they actually were coming to the farms. They were taking videos and pictures of our growers, and then they were going to their like the grocery stores and the supermarkets and so forth. And on the end of the aisle would be this life-size cutout of a grower, a mint grower, and it talked about the grower. And the response from consumers was that, if I remember the messaging right, was basically that it's like consumers didn't put it together that, oh, this mint is actually grown. It was like, we always talk about, milk doesn't come from the grocery store. It comes from the dairy. And it was a similar epiphany where people were like, oh, we grow that flavor. Yeah, we do. It's a natural flavor. And I think the natural side of things, for the consumers really appreciate the mint industry in that regard. It is a natural flavor. It's a naturally grown essential oil that enhances their lives. And I think that's key, very key.
That's a really strong point to point out that to the average consumer, mint is not a synthetic product necessarily. It's natural. It's real. It's grown and harvested, as you pointed out earlier, versus something created in a laboratory.
Yeah. And not to say that there is not synthetic menthol, because there is. That's one of our competitors. But overall, I mean, the best mint oil you can buy, the best mint flavor, it's naturally grown in an herb on 50,000 acres in the United States. And it's very uniquely grown. It's very uniquely processed. I always tell people if people have never seen a mint still work, man, if you have an opportunity to go watch a mint still in operation, your mind will be blown. I mean, it is awesome to watch it. It's like a huge industrial size organic chemistry lab. It's pretty cool. It's very, very cool.
Wow. Steve, walk our listeners through, after harvest and it goes, the distilling part of mint, is that done locally on the farm, or is it collected a lot of times at a central point? How does that chain really work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. And the distillation process is actually on farm. It's the farmers themselves own their own stills, and they've made that huge capital investment. And it's all done on the farm, which is very cool. So you can go to a mint farm. You'll find the choppers, the swathers, the choppers, the mint tubs, the still, and you'll find all of the barrels and the totes that they put the finished oil in. It gets put in and then stored in the warehouse. The buyers come pick it up and take it off and do their thing. But it's very, very cool for the grower controls. That's part of the harvest process. I mean, so it's interesting. I have these conversations a lot of times with regulators, and where they'll be trying to understand, well, but is it harvested, or it's a processed food? No. It's part of the crop. Yeah, we cut it, we put it in a swath, just like you do alfalfa or grass seed or whatever else your crop might be. But it's not done. It's not like a grain. When we go thrash wheat, you get grain in the bin, it goes in the truck, and then off to the elevator and off to the flouring mill, right? Well, and the flour is the end product that somebody wants, right? Well, right. Mint's similar. We put it on the ground, we chop it, put it in a tub. Instead of taking it to the elevator and the elevator takes care of it, the grower keeps it, processes it himself to actually he's paid on a per pound of oil basis. So that distillation process, it's very, very key to being efficient, because that's part of his cost of production is I got to get the oil out of the plant. I mean, now, I should say there is a part of the market that does harvest for the what they call mint leaf, and that's where they make like mint teas and those sorts of things. That's another market altogether. I'm talking about oils in general. Right. But the oils in the plant, the grower's got to get the oil out of the plant in order to get paid on his contract, and he controls that process too.
Awesome. Then that makes its way to the buyers. The buyers makes its way to whoever that end user would be, like a Wrigley's or a Colgate or many other organizations.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of others. Yeah, a lot of flavor houses that are global. Many of them actually sitting at the table at the MRC, and they buy that mint oil, and they'll blend, or they might further refine. The buyers will do this too. They'll further refine that to meet the need of their customer, or they'll whatever's going on to meet the criteria that end user wants. Is if they want a specific oil, and they can give them the specs and say, this is what I want. And then the grower delivers the raw commodity, and the raw commodity then is handled and then moved on to where it needs to go to sell into the market that it's specifically needed at, and what their needs are.
Steve, you touched on something earlier. Most of this conversation's focused on the oil side of things with mint, but the fresh mint market. Talk to us a little bit about the fresh mint market. In our opening, I was kidding a little bit about, some cocktails, but, desserts, certainly, the fresh mint leaves. What are some other uses for the fresh mint leaf market, and what kind of demand do you see in that space?
I would say in the culinary market is probably the biggest use, obviously, for fresh mint, and a lot of the times it's what do they call that? Put it on your plate, like
a garnish.
Garnish, thank you. And it's because it's a smell. You a lot of times you'll put that spearmint leaf on a brownie sundae. You get that smell. The brownie is not mint. It's just that there's a mint leaf on it, and you get the little bit of you enjoy that. Suddenly you enjoy that mint a little bit, or that brownie a little bit more. I think the culinary market's a big deal. The other thing I would say that's going on that's interesting is there's more and more interest, if you will, in what they're calling extracts they're pulling things out of the mint oil for specific uses. Fascinating deal, and what that is. And there are some folks out there, one of them in which actually is an associate member of the MRC. They're not a full-fledged member, but they're associate member. And they've got a very, very interesting use of an extract of mint oil, and they're very interested in potentially large volumes of mint oil. It'd be a ginormous shot in the arm for the mint industry overall, both in North America and globally, because if they actually meet that demand of oil, that's a huge volume of oil that's got to be made up somewhere, right?
Wow, that's excellent. And it's exciting to know that the industry is evolving, and there's more and more research that's being done, that's been generated by the Mint Industry Research Council and your partners and members that are really trying to make this unique crop evolve. And it's been around for centuries, but we continue to find awesome resources, awesome sources for this particular product.
Absolutely. Another thing to add here is mint growers they're one of a kind. They're very dedicated to their crop. These guys are like legacy mint farms. I mean, we're talking multi-generational mint farms that have been there for a long time, and they continue to make it work. And I work with a lot of growers. I love farmers. I just salt of the earth people, some of the best people you'll ever work with. And mint grower is no different. They're so committed to their crop. They're very proud to be a mint farmer. There's not a whole lot of them in the world. I think I was just asked the other day, how many mint farmers do I think are in the U.S.? And I think within our organization, the MIRC, we kind of kick around the number. It's about 200 total U.S. wide. So it's a nice, tight little group. But man, they do it right, and they're really progressive thinkers. They get very creative. How do we keep this thing rolling, and those sorts of things. But great group of people, great industry overall.
Excellent. Well, Steve Salisbury, I want to thank you for joining us here today on this episode of FieldLink as we learned about the mint industry and the unique things that mint is bringing to consumers around the world.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
And welcome back to FieldLink. Joining us from Nashville is Jody Lawrence, our market analyst. Jody, lots happening in the oil market. We had some activity taking place in the Middle East. Let's bring us up to speed how that is impacting grain markets today.
All right, Bill, thanks for being back. Good morning. The Israel/Hamas Iran war that's been going on for over a year. The first report that we got over Friday night, first thing Saturday morning, was that Israel had retaliated against Iran against last week's missile strikes. And that has always been something that pumped up crude oil. But then on the back end of it, apparently they have diplomatic representatives from both sides and the U.S. and part of NATO and the UN trying to negotiate just for this thing to be over. And when everybody heard the negotiation, this may be getting close to being over. Crude oil opened last night $3 lower, which is trading right at $70. So that's a 3% drop. And now, as we sit here at about 10 o'clock Monday morning, it's traded as low as $4.50 lower, which is a huge move on one event that all they're saying is that they are hopeful, because we've seen this three times, maybe four, over the last year of this conflict, and they do not have a resolution. And then the next round of missile strikes is more intense than the previous. So I'm really surprised that crude's down this much, because it's such a volatile situation. But whatever happens in this, you have a lot of push the sell button first, and then let's see what happens when the smoke clears. And when crude's down 3-4%, there's just no way for the rest of the commodities to have a bullish run. And it really isn't much new corn and bean news, because U.S. harvest is flying along. And in the absence of any bullish news, the crude oil being down so much has pressured the grains early this week.
Yeah, and you said a key word, Volatility. And that's the whole Middle East right now. And when we think about oil, there's so many things happening there. We have, the current administration, pressuring don't hit the oil fields, which Israel has not done yet. But this next round, if they don't get what they need, there could be some vulnerability there.
And absolutely, because Israel is never known for taking half measures or from backing down. That I just have a hard time believing they're going to go, okay, just let's do all the hostage swaps and we'll never have any problems again. So to me, I don't know if this simply is, with the U.S. election so close, everybody wants to have a little bit of a conspiracy theory. And I certainly have a callous against all these, odd kind of diplomatic, hey, look how great our administration did, leading into a big election like this. So I'm taking all of this with a grain of salt and just move on and look forward to finishing up harvest, and then the November USDA report that updates yields one final time in 2024 before we get to the big final January report.
Well, Jody, we're certainly in a time where both, politics and the markets are colliding, and it looks like it's going to be that way for the next several weeks as we approach quickly the U.S. election, which could certainly change how politics can impact the markets, especially when we start talking about tariffs. Based on your feelings right now and your understanding, what are we going to be looking at in terms of the transition of tariffs here?
Well, the interesting thing about watching that is obviously Trump is pro-tariff. We all know that, regardless which side of the aisle you're sitting on. We know that when he was president, and that was what I guess it was in 2018 when he put the initial set of tariffs on, when the soybean market was really just beat down dramatically because his intention was to get China to fly right and live up to various human rights and other issues and then buy more from the U.S. So he put on these very punitive tariffs. And the hard part about any of this is that ultimately it affects the U.S. consumer, regardless of how you do the math, and it also hurts at farm price, because if the world's largest soybean buyer, and since then in the last 6 years they've even ramped up with what they're buying from Brazil. So I'm not going to make a political comment, but we do know that Trump has already taken a very aggressive stance on reinstating a lot of tariffs. And you can see the bean market react to each new poll that has shown Trump narrowing in some states, pulling ahead in some of the battleground states in others, and some of the wagering sites that have seen Trump gain momentum towards winning the election. And then the odd thing in this is that we still have tariffs in place against China that are restricting some trade. We have tariffs now. We know which party's been in power for the last 4 years, so you can't really say that the Democrats hate tariffs and the Republicans love them, or Trump v. Harris, because they're really in right now. And it's more simply, who could we put in there to soften our rhetoric and the trade tensions that we have with China to get us back to the $300 million phase one trade deal that was somewhat in effect in Trump's latter stage of his last couple of years in office.
It'll be interesting to see what the voters decide here in the next 8 to 10 days as elections come around, and how that's definitely going to impact the commodity markets globally based on that election. Jody, you touched on one other area, and that was weather and harvest. And boy, things are moving along just great across the country in terms of harvest. Any update there?
Harvest should be almost largely complete within the next week to 10 days, except for the stragglers of places that have had, either, really bad mechanical luck or things like that, or just waiting for it to dry down in the field to save themselves some drying cost. So we know that yields have been consistent with what the USDA put out in the previous reports. So a 185 for corn yield nationally and a 54, give or take a tenth of a bushel or two. Somewhere in there is about where the market is trading. I have not seen any major social media posts from the big states, the I states, Nebraska, any place that was seeing record yields early, that they are falling off. And with that, we always look at basis to see during a really intense harvest pressure, is basis going up to kind of give us a tell that potentially there is a bushel and a half missing out there of the corn crop. And we've seen some basis improvement, but it's just simply because over the last 5 years, the U.S. farmer, because of all the money that was made and the good prices that were available from 21 to the middle of 23, built a lot of storage. So there's a lot of corn getting squirreled away right now, dry corn going out of the field. They're shutting the bins, trying to control this, get with their CPAs as soon as harvest is done, and figure out all the math to what they can sell, what checks they can write for prepay or upgrading equipment, land, whatever the case may be, to balance the books for least amount of taxes by the end of the year. So we don't feel like there's going to be a flood of sales anytime between now and the end of the year. And looking at the corn market, we've been pretty just hopelessly stuck between 4 and 4.25 December futures. And while it's better than the 380 low in September, I have a hard time talking to anybody who's including all of their expenses and paying themselves back for the land, the opportunity costs that they're missing for renting anything, that 425 is making a heck of a lot of money. So it's again back into the vicious cycle of what happens in production ag when everybody does their job really well. We end up hurting ourselves in some capacity.
Yep. Definitely a lot going on with the weather and yields. And, we've talked about it on this podcast a lot. We continue to amaze, American producers doing a heck of a job of producing, and they continue to do a great job to feed and fuel and clothe, this country. So, looking like another great harvest this year, and we'll see where these markets land here over the next several weeks as we approach election 24. Jody, I want to thank you for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill. And everybody, please go out and vote while early voting is still open, or make sure that you go out on election day.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. To learn more about research that's taking place for the mint industry, check out their website at usmintindustry.com to learn more. And be sure to never miss an episode about the latest in production agriculture markets, technology, and innovation, and the people that help feed, fuel, and clothe the world by subscribing to the FieldLink podcast wherever you get your podcasts.